He hadn't looked in a mirror in 34 years. Not since the fire. Not since his face became something people crossed the street to avoid. But that night, he heard something scratch at the metal door, and for a second he hoped it was death. Shotgun ready, heart tired, Walt Duggan swung the door open. Rain, wind, and a box, duct taped shut, twitching like it was alive. He almost pulled the trigger. But then, a sound. A whimper. That was the night the man with no face found something even more forgotten than himself. This story will break you, and if you let it, it might rebuild you too. Subscribe to Valor Tails. Stay until the end, because what happens after the whimper is something you'll never forget. It was sometime after midnight when Walt Duggan heard the sound. A soft, wet rustling. Not quite urgent, not quite right. In the Edgewater resettlement zone, noise meant trouble or worse. Company. But this sound felt smaller, broken. Rain tapped like nervous fingers on the rusted roof of his container home. Walt sat still, spoon frozen midair above a can of cold beans. He tilted his head. Another rustle. This time, a soft whimper rode the wind. He stood, joints stiff and rebelling, and shuffled to the door. No porch, no light, just mud and memory. He opened the metal door with a groan that sounded like the container itself didn't want to be bothered. There, at the bottom of the crooked concrete steps, was a soggy cardboard box. He hesitated. That box could hold anything. In Edgewater, people didn't wrap gifts, they dropped burdens. Walt stepped down, feeling his breath catch with the cold. The rain had softened the cardboard to pulp, edges caving inward. Inside were two tiny bodies curled, filthy, shivering. Puppies. One was mottled gray with eyes sealed shut. The other, jet black with a bent front paw, blood crusted around a torn ear. Both were breathing, but barely. On top of them, stuck to a damp scrap of duct tape, was a note scribbled in all caps. Don't want them. Take them, if you're pitiful enough. Walt Blinkel. He hadn't touched another living being in over 6 years. He looked over his shoulder. No one. Not that it mattered, no one looked for him anymore. Most didn't remember he existed. If they did, they whispered things like melted face and burnt-up freak. He crouched and gently reached in. One pup let out a tiny squeal. The other just trembled. All right then, he muttered, mostly to the rain. Looks like you drew the short straw too. Back inside, he wrapped them in one of his only dry towels and set them near the space heater. The black one whined. The gray one made no sound at all. He stood over them for a long time, watching, not petting, just watching. Finally, he walked back to his workbench. In the center sat a cracked hand mirror, maybe from the late 70s. The silver was peeling along the corners. He had kept it only to shave, but hadn't done that in years. Not since the accident. He reached for it slowly, fingers hovering. Then he flipped it face down again with a dull clack. There was no need to look. He remembered what he used to look like. Square jaw, full head of hair, a smirk people either loved or hated. Then came the explosion, the fire, the surgeries. And then, the world's slow retreat. No mirror, no memory, he murmured. Better not to recall what scares you. He slumped into the worn recliner, a hand-me-down from a time before the burn unit, before isolation. The pups made no noise. The heater hummed. The rain grew heavier, as if trying to drown the silence. Hours passed before the gray pup stirred. Its breathing deepened. Walt watched its flank rise and fall, methodical and brave. The black one nudged closer, pressing its nose against Walt's boot. He didn't move. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, for the first time in forever, something was moving toward him instead of away. His eyes drifted to the towel. Blood from the torn ear had left a small blot on the fabric. He stood and walked to the sink, rummaging through a bin of expired medical supplies he'd once refused to throw away. Bandages, hydrogen peroxide, a roll of tape. He hadn't planned on using them again, especially not for himself. The gray pup twitched as the antiseptic touched its wound. Walt moved slowly, silently, Not saying a word, but not turning away either. He didn't coo or baby talk, he just cared. And then, as he rolled the black pup to check its ribs, he saw it. A tattoo. Tiny, blue-black. Faded but legible. 5 digits, like a serial number, inked into the skin just beneath the ear. He blinked, sat back, stared. "That's not from any shelter I know," he muttered. His breath slowed. There was something about the number. Too specific, too clinical. It wasn't just a rescue tag. It meant something. And he suddenly knew this wasn't just a case of someone dumping puppies in a box out of cruelty. This was something darker. Something that would force him to leave the comfort of being unseen. But for now, he leaned back against the wall, cradling both pups in the towel as they began to breathe a little deeper. "Guess we're stuck with each other," he said quietly. The mirror stayed face down. But for the first time in decades, the man behind the melted face wondered if he'd ever want to turn it over. Morning came heavy and gray over Edgewater. The kind of morning that didn't ask for anything, didn't offer anything, just lingered. Walt sat on the edge of his cot, watching the 2 pups now clean, blanketed in a flannel shirt, and twitching gently in their sleep. The gray one, the quiet one, had started to open one eye. The black one had found comfort curled against Walt's old army boot. It had been a long time since anything in this place had moved with that much trust. Walt sipped stale coffee from a chipped mug and listened to the low hum of life he hadn't heard in years. Not the wind, not the rain, but the slow, almost imperceptible sound of not being alone. He didn't expect the knock. Not here, not ever. It was soft. 3 hesitant taps, then silence. He didn't move. Then again, 3 more. He opened the door halfway, ready to bark something gruff, something that would keep the world out. But standing there was a kid, maybe 12, skinny, knobby-kneed, in worn-out sneakers and a backpack that had seen too many school years. His hoodie was 3 sizes too big, and his eyes were big and brown, curious as they were unafraid. "Hey," the boy said. "You the guy who lives in the tin can?" Walt started. The boy squinted past him and gasped. "Are those puppies?" Walt tightened his grip on the door. "They're not dangerous, are they?" the kid asked. "'Cause my grandma's allergic, but I still think dogs are way better than cats." Not that she'd admit it. Silence. Then the kid smiled awkwardly. "I'm Jalen. I live over there." He pointed to a row of prefabs behind the trash bins. "My grandma says you used to work in a factory. She also says not to bother you. But I saw the box. Last night. I think they were in it." "Isn't he?" Walt let the silence sit between them like smoke. "You gonna keep him?" Jalen asked. "'Cause if not, I know a lady who takes in strays. But she's kind of weird. Wears tinfoil hats." "They're not going anywhere," Walt said finally. Jalen lit up. "Cool." He shifted from foot to foot, then pulled a piece of string cheese from his hoodie pocket. "Want it for the pups?" Walt hesitated, then took it wordlessly. "Hey," Jalen said, cocking his head. "Are you a person or like a burned-up Santa Claus?" It wasn't meant cruelly. There was no malice. Just honesty, the kind only children can deliver, and somehow get away with. Walt blinked. Then something inside him cracked, barely. Not enough to let in a flood. Just a little light. "I'm just a guy," he muttered, trying not to mess up what's left. "Fair," Jalen nodded. "I mess up stuff all the time. I once put peanut butter in my grandma's gas tank 'cause I thought it'd make the car smell better." For a second, a smile threatened the corner of Walt's face. He pushed it down. "Can I see them?" Jalen asked. "They're sleeping." "Oh, that's cool. Maybe later then." The next day, Jalen returned with a plastic bag full of crusts, a torn tennis ball, and something that resembled a dog bowl, but was actually a pie pan. "I Googled how to take care of puppies," he announced proudly. "You got any puppy formula?" Walt didn't. "Then we're improvising," Jalen declared, rummaging through Walt's cramped kitchen. Together, they attempted to warm up condensed milk on Walt's 30-year-old coffee maker, using an empty jar and a tea light. It leaked. Twice. Walt said nothing as sticky puddles formed on the floor. Jalen just grinned. "They're gonna grow up strong," he said, maybe even superhero strong. They're dogs, not avengers. Walt replied dryly. You say that, but I think the black one's already planning something. Look at those eyes. Plotting. The gray pup, smaller and still weak, lay across Jalen's shoe. He didn't move for minutes. Jalen kept coming, day after day, never asking much. Just showing up with linty dog treats, stories about his school. It sucks, but I like Miss Peterson. She smells like cinnamon. And jokes he read online. Walt found himself listening. One afternoon, Jalen held the black pup in his lap. What's his name? He asked. Walt hesitated. I've been calling him Little Bitey, Jalen grinned. But that probably won't age well, Walt thought. Teddy. Jalen raised an eyebrow. The tough one? Short for Theodorable. Jalen cracked up, and Walt, despite himself, chuckled. Just once. What about the gray one? Jalen asked. Blue, Walt said. He's not blue. No, Walt said softly, but he feels like it. That night, Walt sat on the cot, journal in hand, pen scratching slowly across the yellowed paper. He wrote carefully, as if afraid the words might vanish if he breathed too hard. I have two tails that wag when I come home. That might just be enough reason to keep living. He paused, and then, for the first time in a very, very long time, he smiled. Not because anything had changed dramatically, not because the pain had disappeared, but because for the first time, it wasn't only his pain filling the room. And that was something. The Edgewater Public Library didn't get many visitors these days. Its roof leaked in 3 places. The heater coughed like a lifelong smoker, and most of the books were older than the students who no longer came. But Clara Ellison still came in every weekday morning at exactly 9, rain or shine, and unlocked the front door with the same gentle sigh she'd made since her husband passed away 9 years ago. Clara was 71. Her hair had once been auburn, now a careful white. She wore hand-knit cardigans and shoes with memory foam. But more than anything, Clara wore quiet, the kind of quiet only found in people who had outlived the loudest parts of their lives. On a Thursday, near closing time, she saw him. Not him, as in someone she recognized. Just a shadow near the entrance. Broad shoulders, a long coat, face downcast, a hood pulled too far forward, like it was trying to apologize for being there at all. She nearly didn't look up from the return desk. But something, maybe the stillness, maybe the shape of his loneliness, made her pause. The man approached slowly. He held out a small, beaten notebook. I need a new one, he muttered, voice low and gravelly. Clara blinked. Excuse me? He placed the notebook gently on the counter. Ran out of pages. She looked at the notebook. Spiral bound, cover soft from years of handling, edges frayed. The kind of notebook people carried when they were too poor for leather and too proud to use napkins. Clara nodded. Of course. Let me grab something from the donations bin. He gave a slight nod, turned away, then stopped. I'll be back tomorrow. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Then, he was gone. She didn't mean to peek. She really didn't. But when she picked up the notebook to move it, a page slipped free. Handwriting, shaky, precise, greeted her like a whisper. She worked my shift that night. I wanted to surprise her with a wedding cake. 3rd-degree burns took 90, 1% of her. The rest was regret. Clara's breath caught. She froze, unsure if she should set it down or keep reading. But her eyes betrayed her. The ring melted into a piece of her spine. They gave it to me in a paper envelope. I didn't open it for 6 years. She closed the notebook gently, as if it were made of bone. Then, with hands slower than usual, she walked to the lost and found cabinet and selected a fresh notebook from the shelf. But she didn't forget. The next day, he returned. Same coat, same quiet. She handed him the notebook. Here. He took it wordlessly. Started to turn. I'm Clara, she said, voice soft but even. He paused. Didn't reply. She didn't expect him to. Over the next 2 weeks, he came every other day, returned the finished notebook, took another. He never made eye contact. She never pushed. But she began noticing things. The way he hesitated before leaving. The way he touched the new notebook like it was sacred. And, every so often, how his hands trembled just enough to betray the walls he'd built. Then one evening, near sunset, she waited until he left. She opened the notebook. I was 28. Her name was Lorna. She smelled like vanilla and kept warm socks in every drawer. I still hear her voice when the wind hits right. Clara read slowly, not as a librarian, not as a voyeur, but as someone who had once watched the person they loved slip from the world without taking her hand with them. She copied that page, word for word, into her own journal. Then she copied another, and another. Over the next week, she continued, with care, with reverence, with something close to love. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't have to. On a Monday afternoon, she left a small package at the front desk. Inside was a leather bookmark she'd kept since her husband's funeral and a note that simply read, "I don't see your face, but I read your heart." No signature. He never mentioned it. But the next day when he came in, he lingered a moment longer at the desk. "You work here every day?" he asked. "I do," Clara replied. He nodded. Then, after a pause, "I'm Walt." She smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Walt." They didn't say more, but something shifted. That weekend, Clara baked a batch of cinnamon-dusted waffle cookies, her late husband's favorite. She wrapped them in a napkin with little acorns printed along the edges and brought them to the library, setting them in a small basket near the return desk. He came in late, as always. She gestured. "Hungry?" He looked at the basket, then her. His eyes lingered just for a moment. Then he picked up a cookie, broke it in half, and popped a piece into his mouth. "Good," he mumbled. She smiled. "I use real butter. No margarine nonsense." He didn't laugh. But he didn't scowl either. And so it began. Every 3 days, Clara would bring a book she thought he might like. Mostly non-fiction, nature, memoirs, stories about people who had lost everything but found ways to live anyway. She never insisted, just left them near the basket. Walt took a few, not all, but enough. One day, she found a slip of paper under her favorite mug at the return desk. It was torn from his notebook. It read, "The mirror cracked the day I came home alone. I flipped it down and never turned it back. But now I wonder if, maybe the crack is where the light gets in." She folded the note carefully and tucked it into the lining of her purse. That night, she sat by the window, tea in hand, and looked out over the dying trees. She thought about her late husband, the way he used to whistle off-key. She thought about how silence had become her friend, and now how someone else's silence had begun to fill the room with something new. Not noise, but presence. And she realized, quietly, without surprise, that she was looking forward to Monday. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the linoleum floors, and a chipped poster on the wall warned about heartworms in bright red letters. Walt sat stiffly on a plastic chair that creaked under his weight, arms crossed, eyes lowered. Teddy and Blue huddled in a threadbare tote bag at his feet. Clara sat beside him, a book in her lap, unread. It had taken her 2 weeks to convince him to come. At first, he refused. "They're fine," he'd muttered. "They eat. They sleep. What else is there?" But Blue had developed a cough. A raspy, hollow sound that came at night and didn't go away with warm blankets or whispered reassurances. Clara had insisted. She'd even made a deal. If Walt came with her to the clinic, she'd stop reading his journals without permission. That had made him flinch, but he'd agreed. Now they waited. The receptionist was kind, though visibly startled when Walt first walked in. He kept his hood up, hands in pockets, like armor. The pups had both been scanned and examined in silence, save for Blue's occasional wheeze and Teddy's nervous licking. The vet, a man in his early 40s named Dr. Nish Patel, emerged from the exam room holding a tablet. "There's something you should see," he said, eyes meeting Clara's first, then shifting carefully to Walt's. Walt stood slowly, shoulders tense. Clara followed. Inside the small exam room, Teddy sat on the steel table, tail tucked, ears low. Blue rested beside him, his breathing shallow but steady. Walt moved to stand between them and the vet, protective without realizing it. Dr. Patel held up the tablet. We scanned both dogs for chips. Teddy has a tattoo here, just inside the ear. It matches records from a shut-down breeding facility just outside of Reno. It was closed 2 years ago. Horrific conditions. Most animals didn't make it out. Walt's lips parted. They came from there? Dr. Patel nodded. I checked the archived registry. Teddy's code shows he was part of a line used for overbreeding. Genetic markers suggest high risk for multiple congenital issues. That's probably why they were dumped. He paused. Careful. Blue's lungs are compromised. Might be infection or something worse. But Teddy, he has a severe heart defect. It's genetic. He may have a few months, maybe less. The words didn't hit Walt all at once. They sank slowly, like lead in molasses. He looked down at Teddy, who wagged his tail weakly at the sound of his voice. No surgery? Walt asked. Too costly and too risky. I'm sorry. Clara reached for the table edge. Her fingers trembled slightly. Walt didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, he leaned against the wall, stared at the dogs and whispered, Of course. Dr. Patel gave them space. He handed Clara a brochure and left the room. Walt stared at Teddy, small, fragile, scarred, not broken, just worn. He swallowed hard. I can't save anything. Walt, Clara said gently. He shook his head. Her name was Lorna. She was supposed to take the weekend off. I picked up an extra shift so we could go cake tasting together. But she said, No, you go. I'll cover your hours. That's the last thing she said to me. His voice cracked. She burned. I got a medal, and a face no one wants to look at. Clara didn't move. She let him speak. I tried to put out the fire. I got her halfway to the door. Then the second blast came. It took her. It took me. They said I was lucky to live. Lucky. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. Lucky. Blue let out a small cough. Walt bent down, scooped him into his arms, cradling him like something already gone. And now this, he said softly, another thing I can't fix. Another life I dragged out of a box just to watch it fade. Teddy whined, resting his head on Walt's boot. I thought maybe this time I could do something different. Just once. Clara stepped closer. Her hand went to her purse, then paused. She looked at Walt. Really looked. Not past him. Not around him. Into him. Then she turned, walked back into the lobby, and returned moments later with a small object wrapped in cloth. It was the mirror. Walt blinked. Why did you bring that? She placed it gently on the counter. Because you keep running from it. He turned away. She stepped beside him. I'm not asking you to look. Not today. Her hand reached forward, turned the mirror face down. But I need you to stop thinking you're cursed. You didn't make the fire. You didn't cause her death. And you didn't put that tattoo in Teddy's ear. He didn't answer. She softened. You didn't choose the pain, Walt. But you're choosing what to do with it. He let out a shaky breath. I can't bury another one, he whispered. Then don't, she said. Let me carry it with you. He looked at her. This time, fully. The light caught the soft folds around her eyes. The kindness there. He'd never seen anyone look at him like that since Lorna. After a long silence, he nodded. Just once. Later that evening, back inside the container, Walt sat at his workbench. Teddy and Blue slept on a blanket nearby. The mirror lay face down beside his notebook. He opened the notebook slowly. She worked my shift. She died because I let her. At least, that's what I tell myself. But today, someone said I didn't start the fire. That maybe carrying regret isn't the same as earning it. I don't know if I believe her, but I believe in the way she said it. He paused, Ben hovering. Blue is coughing again. Teddy wagged his tail after eating a full spoon of milk. I sat there and just watched. Not fixing, not running, just being. He set down the pen. Outside, the wind brushed against the metal walls of his shelter. But inside, for the first time, it didn't sound so empty. Edgewater had never been a place that made it into brochures. It wasn't picturesque, it wasn't historic, and it certainly wasn't welcome in city planning meetings. But it was home for Walt, for Jalen and his grandmother, for the dozens of others who lived in rusted trailers and patchwork shelters along the cracked pavement. And lately, thanks to Clara's quiet persistence and the two dogs whose tails never stopped wagging, it had also become something almost unrecognizable. Hopeful. But hope doesn't go unnoticed. The announcement came on a Monday, stapled to every post and bulletin board in Edgewater, printed on white paper with bold black lettering. Notice of Community Transition Plan. Underneath it, in smaller font, the words spelled it out clearly. All residents of the Edgewater Resettlement Zone will be required to vacate by the end of the fiscal quarter. Permanent redevelopment plans will commence. No exceptions. At the bottom, a signature. Reverend Thomas Langley, Chairman, Community Renewal Council. Walt stood in front of the flyer, hands clenched in his coat pockets. Blue and Teddy were leashed at his side, both quiet, as if they sensed something heavier than usual in the air. Around him, murmurs grew. People muttered, cursed, cried. Someone kicked a garbage can. Jalen's grandmother folded the flyer like it had insulted her directly. Clara showed up minutes later, her face red with anger. "They can't just displace people like this," she hissed. "We've got rights." Walt said nothing. He'd known this was coming. He'd felt the shift in the way people looked at Edgewater lately. City vans had started driving by slower. Cameras had shown up more often. They called it revitalization, but what they meant was, get rid of the people who don't look good in news photos. 2 days later, a town hall meeting was announced open to the public, the flyer claimed. Clara insisted they go. Walt resisted. She didn't care. That Thursday evening, the local high school auditorium was packed. Clean seats, bright lights, too many microphones. On stage, Reverend Langley stood tall and polished, a man in his mid-60s with white hair combed immaculately and a jaw that looked chiseled from marble. He wore his tailored suit like it had never seen a wrinkle. Walt sat near the back with Clara, hunched low, face in shadow. Langley began with a prayer. Then came the speech. "This city," Langley proclaimed, "was built on promise, on hard work, on vision, and we cannot fulfill that promise while neglecting areas that have fallen into decay. We cannot stand for community health while ignoring zones plagued by unsanitary conditions, crime, and despair. Edgewater must be reborn." A smattering of applause followed. Walt didn't move. Langley continued, "I understand that change is uncomfortable, but sanitation, public safety, and dignity are not negotiable. Edgewater has become the last blight we must address. I know there are dogs. I know there are stories. But we cannot allow sentimentality to replace structure, not when people's well-being is at stake." Clara's face turned white. "Did he just say sentimentality?" she whispered, stunned. "He said dogs and stories like they're diseases," Walt muttered. Langley opened the floor to comments. Clara stood first. She spoke clearly, passionately. "Edgewater isn't perfect, but its people, its families, its veterans, its widows, its children. You can't treat them like broken furniture that needs to be thrown out." Langley nodded diplomatically. "Thank you, ma'am. Your heart is clearly in the right place." Then, with a slight smile, he added, "But this isn't about heart. It's about infrastructure." Walt rose slowly from his seat. Clara turned to him. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. He made his way to the front. Every step felt like dragging a memory across a gravel road. He stopped at the microphone. His hood stayed on, his face mostly hidden, his voice low at first. "My name is Walt Duggan," he began. "I've lived in Edgewater for almost 20 years. Before that, I worked in the steel mill. Before that, I served in the army." Langley's expression didn't change. 30 years ago, Walt continued, there was a fire at a church. My face didn't come out the same after that. Murmurs rippled through the room. I remember the boy I pulled out of that fire. Couldn't have been older than 10. Blonde hair, blue sweater. I didn't know his name, but I carried him through smoke and flame and begged God not to let me die before I got him out. Langley's smile faltered. I've spent decades hiding in Edgewater because the world decided I wasn't fit for daylight. My neighbors didn't turn away. They gave me space. They gave me time. He took a breath. And now you want to erase it. Again, another thing to cross off the city's to-do list. 9. He looked directly at Langley. I don't want thanks for saving that boy. I don't want pity for this face. But I am done being erased. I am done watching people call suffering unsightly. I'm not here to be cleaned up. I'm here because this is my home. Silence swept the auditorium. Langley said nothing. Walt stepped away from the microphone. Clara rose, clapping. Then others joined Jalen's grandmother, the bus driver who lived in the trailer park, the man with the limp who always gave away canned goods. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, grounded. Langley's jaw tightened. He cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Duggan. Your words are noted, but the council has already voted. The transition plan is moving forward. Walt paused beside Clara. He doesn't remember me, he said quietly. Clara looked at him. Or he remembers, and he just can't admit it. They left before the meeting ended. Back in the container that night, Walt sat by the window with Teddy curled against his leg and Blue asleep near the heater. Clara placed a thermos of tea on the table beside him. The air was quiet. He looked scared. Walt said softly, "Because you reminded him who he was," Clara replied. "And that's the scariest thing for people who pretend they never needed saving." Walt nodded, staring out into the darkness beyond Edgewater. "I don't need gratitude," he said. "No," Clara agreed. "You need a place that doesn't vanish under someone else's idea of progress." And for the first time since the flyer had gone up, Walt didn't feel like a man waiting for a storm. He felt like a man standing in the middle of it and staying put. 3 days after the town hall meeting, Clara made a phone call she hadn't made in over a year. She dialed carefully, with fingers that trembled more from the weight of hope than age. The voice that answered on the other end was warm and alert, touched with that fast-paced New York rhythm that never quite faded, even in family. "Ellie? It's Aunt Clara." The voice on the other end brightened instantly. "Auntie C, I was just thinking of you. What's going on?" Clara paused. "I have a story, and I think it's one that needs to be told." Ellie Kramer had been telling stories since she was a teenager, with a handheld camcorder and a passion for finding humanity in overlooked corners. Now in her 30s, she was an acclaimed documentarian whose short films had been featured in Sundance, PBS, and a dozen streaming platforms. She specialized in quiet revolutions, the kind of change that didn't scream but moved mountains anyway. She booked a flight to Nevada that same night. By Saturday morning, she was in Edgewater. Ellie stepped out of the Uber, wearing jeans, boots, and a black beanie. A camera bag hung from one shoulder, and a thermos of coffee steamed in her hand. She hugged Clara tightly and gave Walt a small, measured nod. "So," she said, crouching down to greet Teddy and Blue, "these are the stars." Blue sniffed her shoes. Teddy licked her fingers. Ellie smiled. Walt didn't. He kept his hood up, his stance wary. "Don't worry," Ellie said gently. "I'm not here to poke around where I'm not wanted. I'm here because you matter. You and this place." Walt gave a slow nod, the kind that said, "I don't trust you yet, but I don't not trust you either." The next week, Ellie followed Walt through his routines. She filmed him feeding the pups, checking on his neighbors, fixing a broken faucet in Jalen's grandmother's trailer. She interviewed Clara, Jalen, and several others in the community. They spoke with quiet reverence about the man who'd once refused to speak to anyone but now remembered birthdays and carried groceries for those who couldn't. But it wasn't the footage of Walt that moved Ellie most. It was the notebook. Late one afternoon, Clara handed Ellie a copied entry from Walt's journal, one she had tucked away long before. "The mirror cracked the day I came home alone. I flipped it down and never turned it back. But now I wonder if maybe the crack is where the light gets in." Ellie sat with those words for a long time. She asked Walt if he would read one of his journal entries on camera. He refused. But the next morning, she found a folded page on her tripod. "I'm not trying to be remembered. I'm just trying not to disappear." She recorded herself reading it aloud, her voice steady and raw. It became the emotional spine of the film. She titled the documentary, "The Man Without a Face." It was 11 minutes and 42 seconds long. She released it online, no marketing budget, no press kit, just a quiet upload with the caption, "He never asked to be seen, but we saw him anyway." Within 24 hours, it had over 100,000 views. Within 72, it hit 1 million. By the end of the second week, it had reached over 7 million people across the country. Viewers left thousands of comments, some from veterans, some from burn survivors, some from people who had never known what it meant to be invisible until they saw Walt. One comment read, "He's the most human thing I've ever watched. He's me, just quieter." Another, "That man and those dogs matter more to the soul of this country than 100 polished buildings." The hashtag number #WeWantWalt trended nationally. Schools shared the film in civics classes. A group of teenage girls in Ohio painted murals of Blue and Teddy on alley walls. A city councilman in Seattle quoted Walt's journal entry during a housing debate. And back in Edgewater, things began to change. The city's phone lines jammed with calls. Letters arrived by the hundreds, some with checks enclosed, others with sketches, poems, prayers. A grassroots campaign formed almost overnight. Save Edgewater, save Walt. Over 14,000 people signed a petition demanding the immediate halt of the redevelopment plan. News crews arrived. Interviews were requested. Clara declined most of them. Walt refused them all. But when he saw the mural a local artist painted at the entrance of the settlement, a large, heart-shaped face, cracked down the center, with 2 puppies curled inside, he finally let himself believe. "They don't want to erase us," Clara said softly, standing beside him. Walt nodded. "Not anymore." The city, facing national pressure and growing scrutiny, issued a statement. It was full of bureaucratic language, temporary pause, re-evaluation of developmental impact, community input sessions. But the meaning was clear. The plan to evict Edgewater had been scrapped. Instead, donations flooded in. Volunteers from nearby neighborhoods helped repaint trailers, build wheelchair ramps, and plant gardens. Children brought their old books to the tiny library. Someone donated paint and materials to turn the settlement's central lot into a small park. And when it came time to rename the community, Walt was the one asked to make the decision. He stood on a makeshift stage, a repurposed wooden pallet with 2 microphones. His hoodie was off. His face was visible, raw, honest, unashamed. He cleared his throat. "I didn't think this place could ever be anything more than forgotten land. But then people saw it. They saw us. So if this place is going to have a new name, I think it should come from where that seeing comes from." He looked at Blue and Teddy, sitting beside Clara. "I'd like to call it Hearts View Village." Cheers rang out. The new sign went up that weekend, hand-painted, rough around the edges, but radiant. Hearts View Village, established by the ones who were supposed to be forgotten. Walt didn't speak much after that, but every now and then he would pause at the sign, lay a hand gently on the wooden frame, and smile not just with his mouth, but with something deeper, something that couldn't be erased anymore. It rained the night Walt passed. Not a storm, not even a real downpour, just a soft, persistent drizzle that tapped gently on the metal roof of his container home in Hartsview Village. The kind of rain that made you feel like the world was whispering, not weeping. Inside, everything was quiet. The lamp over the small writing desk cast a low, amber glow across the room. The notebook was closed. The pen, uncapped but unused. Blue lay curled at the foot of the bed, breathing slow and steady. Teddy, now thin and visibly weaker, nestled against Walt's side, head resting on his chest. Clara found him the next morning. She had come by, like she always did on Sunday mornings, with a thermos of coffee and a loaf of cinnamon bread. She knocked softly, then pushed the door open when no one answered. And there he was, Walt Duggan, wrapped in the same flannel blanket Ellie had given him the winter before, with one hand resting gently on Teddy's back. His face was peaceful, more peaceful than Clara had ever seen. There was no tension in his jaw, no crease between his brow, just stillness and release. Teddy lifted his head but didn't move from Walt's side. Blue let out a low, mournful whine and licked Walt's fingers once, then curled back into himself. Clara stepped forward, heart tight. Then she saw it. On the desk, beside the notebook and the mug with "World's Grumpiest Hero" printed in faded letters, was the mirror. It had been turned. For the first time in over 3 decades, the mirror faced up, no longer flipped away, no longer hidden. The cracked center caught the light just so, and for a moment, Clara swore she saw something shining through it. Not his face, not the scars, but the echo of a man who had finally seen himself again. There was also a note, folded once, written in Walt's deliberate, uneven hand. She opened it carefully. If anyone ever sees light in the mirror, then maybe I wasn't thrown away entirely. Maybe I was just waiting long enough to be seen right. Clara sat down and cried. The funeral was small. Walt would have hated a fuss, but it wasn't silent. People came, neighbors, strangers who had seen the documentary, city workers who had once approved plans to demolish his home. Jalen, now 15 and taller than Clara remembered, stood up to speak. He wore a second-hand blazer, shoes too big, and nerves all over his voice. I used to think Walt was a little scary, he began. But then I realized he just looked like how I felt some days, like I didn't belong. He told me once that dogs don't care what you look like, as long as you come back. The crowd chuckled softly. I guess we all kept coming back, and he never let any of us feel forgotten. After the service, Clara and Ellie spent a week planning something they knew Walt never would have asked for but might have quietly approved of. They painted a mural. It stretched across the community center wall at the heart of Hartsview Village. Clara reached out to a local artist named Camilo, who had lived in Edgewater for 6 years and whose mother Walt once helped during a long winter power outage. The mural showed Walt sitting on a bench, surrounded by blue sky and soft sunlight. He held Teddy and Blue in his lap, their heads resting on his shoulders. Around them, a swirl of tiny, almost hidden images. A cracked mirror turned upright, Jalen reading to kids, Clara with a book in hand, Ellie holding a camera. Even Reverend Langley walking away in the background, his face turned from the light. Beneath the painting, in bold, simple lettering, no one looked at his face. But everyone remembers the way he looked at the things the world forgot. People came from miles away to see it. Children left flowers by the bench each week. Travelers wrote letters and tucked them into the cracks near the base of the wall. Some just stood quietly, tracing the outline of Walt's hand on the mural. And every year, on the anniversary of Walt's passing, something extraordinary happened. Blue, now gray in the muzzle and slower in step, would make his way on his own, from the small trailer Clara now shared with him, across the gravel paths of Hartsview Village, to the mural. He would sit beside it, curl up on the ground, and not move until morning. No leash, no commands, just memory, just love. Jalen, now old enough to run the community's storytelling program, would gather a small group of children under the mural's shadow and tell them the story again. Not from a script, from his heart. There was a man who didn't want to be seen, and 2 dogs who saw him anyway. The children always listened, wide-eyed, and one day, the mirror he was afraid of got turned over, and instead of seeing the past, he saw all of us. He'd smile then, soft and certain. He didn't have a face people liked to look at, but he gave us eyes we'll never forget. Some years, the children would draw their own versions of Walt and the dogs. Some years, they'd bring stuffed animals and pretend to read to them, the way Walt once watched Jalen do. Every year, it grew. Not a monument, a memory that lived. Hartsview Village continued to thrive, not because it became perfect, but because it remembered why it existed, to hold the broken parts until they no longer felt broken. Clara kept the mirror. It sat on her desk, beside Walt's last notebook, unopened. She never needed to read the words. She had lived them. One evening, As the sun set behind the mural, casting long golden light across the village, Ellie filmed one final shot for a project she never released. She panned from Blue resting beside the wall, up across the painted face of Walt, and ended on the sky. Then she whispered, just off camera, he was never invisible. He was just waiting for the world to open its eyes. And maybe, finally, it had. They never saw his face. But somehow, millions came to remember his eyes, the way he looked at forgotten things, as if they still mattered. Walt Duggan didn't ask for attention. He didn't fight for fame. He simply lived. And in the end, that was enough to move hearts across the world. His story isn't just his. It's for anyone who's ever felt thrown away. For anyone who's looked in the mirror and wanted to turn it down. And maybe, just maybe, like Walt, they'll find someone or something that gives them a reason to turn it back up again. Here at Valor Tails, we believe in stories that don't shout, but stay. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Help us reach 5,000 subscribers and be part of a community that sees the unseen and values what the world often forgets. As the old saying goes, one kind eye can save a life. You never know which pair of eyes is watching, waiting, and hoping to be seen. This was more than a rescue. It was a return to dignity, to connection, and to love. Thank you for watching and for remembering.